Got John Dodson here with me today. Come all the way up here from lower part of North Carolina, well, upper part, however you want to look at it.
Lower than here.
That's right. He's a retired ATF agent. I worked with him a little bit in Roanoke, in the Roanoke office, and he went on to do bigger things in Phoenix that he'll talk about. What I'd like to give him a chance to do is just kind of talk about your early childhood and how you ended up getting into the service.
Sure. I grew up in Orange County, Virginia.
Okay.
Just about halfway between, say, Charlottesville and Fredericksburg. And small town. I think county had 3 stoplights. My entire high school was like 400 students.
Okay.
I graduated in 1989, and it became accredited in, I think, 1996. So
they got the low hanging fruit out of the way.
Some will argue that I may or may not have a GED, much less a diploma.
Okay.
But so after high school, I did a brief stint in the Army and came back and went active Guard Reserve, AGR, on a joint marijuana eradication program for a summer.
Okay.
And kind of caught the law enforcement bug and decided to pursue a career in law enforcement after that.
So when you got done, what was the first? So what did you do in the military?
Well, I was back then the MOS was a 96 Bravo, so I was a military intelligence analyst.
And so like you just took the information that was gathered and went from there. What was
Yeah.
most of, back in those days, what was most of the intel that y'all were getting? Was it?
Well, the training hadn't quite caught up with current events at the time. Because like I said, I graduated high school in 89, left straight for the Army.
Okay.
Well, after a brief stint at summer school. And then at the time, the training was geared toward, I was trained to be a Soviet military intelligence analyst,
Okay.
but the Soviet Union was collapsing. The Berlin Wall was coming down. And so then I reclassified, same MOS, but I did a specialization in what the Army called, at the time, LIC, low intensity conflict,
Okay.
specializing in Central and South American countries.
Oh, so cool. So you kind of were on the cutting edge of what we would have gone into when the global war of terror kicked off.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So you finished your stint in the military and you came back to Orange County, I'm assuming?
Correct.
Okay. And what'd you do then?
Well, I started out, I had to dispatch for a couple of months until a position at the sheriff's office. I got a job at the sheriff's office. I started out dispatching for a couple of months until a position on the road opened up.
Okay.
And then I went to the academy.
All right. So what academy did you go to?
It was the Rockingham Regional Criminal Justice Academy down just south of Fredericksburg.
Okay.
And at the time, my badge number was 18. I was the 18th deputy at the department. There were 8 of us to work the road, 24/7 road deputies.
So 18 sworn deputies.
Yes.
Okay. And then you finished your career there. How many years did you work as a deputy?
I was a deputy altogether for about... Well, I worked the road for 5 years, and I did that partially in Orange County, and then I eventually ended up in Loudoun County, which was a much bigger department,
Right.
Northern Virginia.
Okay.
I went to Loudoun County. I was there for working the road for less than a year, and then got an initial, it wasn't a promotion at the time. It was a pre-assignment to narcotics because I was making a lot of dope cases out on the road. So they sent me what we would call TDY, but temporary assignment to narcotics.
Okay.
And then until a position opened up there, and I was promoted to detective, vice narcotics investigator.
So talk a little bit about what it looked like. I know we've talked at length about how law enforcement's it's a little bit different now, not proactive, not nearly as proactive as you were going.
Right.
So what would an average night look like when you were doing a proactive patrol inside of either Orange or Loudoun County?
Well, I got to tell you, I was very fortunate when I first started. I had a great sergeant, and he explained it to me very early that, we can track all the tickets that you write, and we can track the number of arrests that you make. But the one thing that we can never track is how many crimes you prevent, and those are the most important. So we were taught whenever you had paperwork to do or a phone call to make, and this is back before cell phones. Like we were issued a roll of quarters to go to payphones and make, call when dispatch would call us, give the office a 21, we'd have to go and find a payphone. But whenever you're driving by a business in the middle of the night, stop, hit it with your alley lights, do a turn, go through, check cars in the parking lot. All these were the proactive things that we used to do. And like it was explained to me, and I didn't understand the importance of it at the time, especially as law enforcement agencies were getting into the UCR reporting,
right.
and trying to track stats on everything, is that these are these intangibles that you can't keep track of, but they actually mean the most. Like, this is what you're doing. You're, protecting and serving at its utmost when you're preventing something from happening in the first place.
That's awesome. So you finished your time in Loudoun County, become a narcotics investigator. How did you transition to federal service?
Well, during my time in Vice Narcotics, I was assigned to the DEA HIDTA task force out of Annandale, which is HIDTA is the high intensity drug trafficking area. And when I was with the county, okay, so to back up a little bit, when I was working the road, I'd make good dope cases. I'd have to turn those off to a narcotics investigator. That would frustrate me. So I became a narc. After making good cases in narcotics, I get frustrated having to turn those over to the feds. So you can't beat them, join them. I got assigned to a DEA task force.
Cool.
And so that was great. We weren't no longer confined by the county line, so to speak. Although work in Vice Narcotics, we did a lot of poaching where we would lure people over from Fairfax,
right
there at Drainesville Road, and get them into our county and do what we needed to do.
Right.
But that kind of gave me the glimpse of not having those
boundaries.
Exactly. That's what I'm looking for. And actually the rules were different somewhat, but there was so much more availability to you to be able to, because I was very fortunate to have good teachers. When I went into Vice Narcotics, I was taught from day one that, for every gram of cocaine that we get, there is no domestic crop of cocaine. Try to take it back to the source. So we tried to take every case we could, climb that ladder to get to the ultimate source of supply.
Right. And so at some point when you were doing narcotics, you were like, hey, I'm really getting frustrated with the cases like this. So what made you decide to go to the federal government?
Well, one of the deciding factors was when I was with DEA, in order for agents to get what's called their 13, their grade level 13, they had to submit a packet. It wasn't quite a promotion, but it had to be approved, and they had certain boxes they had to check.
Okay.
So I was making all these cases, and like my entire unit did, like we worked hard, everyone. But DA agents would come up to me and ask if they could sign off and be a co-case agent on my case because they needed to check the box for wiretap or for informant handling or undercover operations or seizures of this, and so that they could submit their 13 packet and get their pay raise. So I was helping all these DEA agents get their pay raise to make what was nearly twice what I was making at the time.
Right.
And so then that got me thinking I need to throw my ring in the hat and try to get picked up by the feds.
Okay. And how did you end up? So you're still working narcotics. You put in an application. How did that work for you?
Well, I applied for ATF. There was an ATF group in our building in Annandale at the time.
Okay.
And so I applied there. And the only ATF agents I knew were a couple of guys that I worked cases with back once at the task force and another time in Loudoun. And so I applied, and they kind of rushed me through the process. I did my interview and my testing, and at the time ATF had to take the
Treasury exam.
The Treasury enforcement.
And everybody, that's what they got a ton of people.
I walked out of that room saying, okay, well, I will never work for Treasury because there's no way I
can't
passed
add
that test at all.
You can't add, can't subtract.
Right. It was...
Everybody I've ever talked to said the Treasury exam was just a beast.
Yeah, it was a beast.
Horrible.
It really was.
But you made it through it.
I guess so. A couple of weeks later, I got a thing in the mail that said I had passed.
Okay.
And then, like I say, they brought me in for the interview, and I did my psych and my physical. And for the first, I want to say 4 months, it was really hurry, like get me through. And then just quiet, nothing.
Didn't hear nothing.
Completely dark. And then 2 years later, I was on a search warrant in Sterling Park with the Vice Narcotics Squad, and my phone rings. And I answered it, and it was this woman. Her name was Charlotte. I can't remember her last name. And she's like, yeah, I want to offer you a job with ATF. And I said, what are you talking about? Like, that was 2 years ago. I haven't heard from you. I thought I was a no-go. And she says, no, we want to offer you a job. Can you start, I think it was a little less than a month, and out of the Roanoke field office eventually.
Oh, that's cool.
So I accepted, and
so what was the academy? What was the training like for ATF?
Well, the ATF training is two-part. It's at Glencoe, Georgia.
Okay.
It's just outside of Brunswick, technically part of Brunswick. But you have to go through what's called the criminal investigator course, right? You get your CI school.
Okay.
That's to get your actual, what the federal government series is called 1811 for criminal investigator.
Okay.
So you go through CI school, and at the time that was about 10 or 11 weeks.
Okay.
And when I went through, it was still so closely past 9/11 that it was still 6 days a week.
Okay.
Because they were trying to rush agents through at the time. And so that was your basic law enforcement things, your control and arrest techniques, your law, your ethics, your driving, PT almost every day. Well, definitely every day. If we didn't have it with FLETC, then ATF cadre came over from the academy and we'd have it with them.
Okay.
And it was very reminiscent of what I had done in my local, police academy,
Right.
but obviously more geared toward federal statute, federal law, federal standards.
Okay.
So after you complete that, there's a brief break, and then you start the ATF Academy, which is on center at FLETC in Brunswick. And because that was 3 months long, and that's where you learn ATF specific enforcement
The way
operations.
they do things.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So you get done with school in Georgia, and then you come back. Where did you end up your first assignment?
Well, my first assignment was out of the Roanoke field office, but I was to be assigned to a satellite office, a brand new satellite office in Harrisonburg, Virginia. So it was me and a senior agent were the only 2 ATF personnel there. And we were housed in a small ICE facility, but we worked primarily with the Rush Drug Task Force at the time, the Rockingham University, Shenandoah, and Harrisonburg Task Force.
Okay. All right. And so talk about like any cases that stand out to you while you were in Roanoke that you're like, hey, this was significant.
Well, yeah, we had several significant cases, and not only the ones in Roanoke, but the ones that we would come down and help the guys in Roanoke with regularly. But back then, at that time, the biggest problem that we were having was meth was hitting the area hard.
Okay.
And it was a lot. This is my time with the county when I was in Vice Narcotics. I went to DA Cleat School, the Clean Lab Enforcement Team.
Right.
And so even though we didn't have a lot of labs in Loudon, if you're Cleat certified, you would get called out to go on.
Right.
So we would go out and do lab work and, in other places. But in Harrisonburg, we didn't have a lot of labs, a lot of the Nazi labs, the car trunk labs, things like that. But nothing major. It was just pounds and pounds of really high quality methamphetamine, crystal meth hitting the area and hitting the streets. And so we were working those, with the Rush Drug Task Force, as well as any time that, a weapon was involved in the narcotics trafficking or, convicted felons with weapons. So any other violent crime that was occurred.
So what did you feel like was the cause? I mean, was it geographic location as far as Harrisonburg? I know Harrisonburg has always had a high concentration of methamphetamine for whatever reason. Anything that stood out to you as why that is the case based on your experience there?
I mean, my experience with it has always been, it seems like the different areas, be they certain geographic or demographic situations, exist to where one drug of choice takes over predominantly more than another one. And sometimes it's totally opposite to what you might think.
Okay.
But it just, for whatever reason, and I don't even pretend to be, in the weeds or the psychology enough of it to understand why, but meth is what was hitting.
That's just what was in Harrisonburg.
Yeah. But in Northern Virginia, working the DC area, it was crack and heroin. So I knew crack and heroin like the back of my hand, and then I had to learn meth. Mm-hmm. And
it's a different ball game. Isn't it?
Totally, yeah.
All right, so talk a little bit about. So you work in Roanoke. At some point, you end up. Where'd you go after Roanoke?
I was assigned to start one of the new Southwest border firearms trafficking strike groups in Phoenix, Arizona.
All right. So what time frame is this?
This was, my report date was November 2009.
So 2009. Who was like, what administration was that?
This was the Obama administration.
Okay. Yeah. And I guess I'm trying to figure out, I should have done a better job figuring out what the dates were, but I guess he became president in 2008, correct?
Well, he won the election in 2008 and then would have, I believe, started, January 15th or 20th of 2009.
So the border initiative at that point was kind of his thing.
Yeah, because what had happened was the U.S. had declared that the instability along the Southwest U.S. border and all the crime that was occurring was a threat to national security.
Okay.
Didn't specifically name the cartels as entities at the time, just that the disorder and the instability was a threat to our security.
Okay.
So that opened up the floodgates of how to work the cartel problem in Mexico. So a lot of money was allocated to do this, not only to ATF, but to other agencies.
Okay.
What ATF did with their part of the kitty was to start these. I don't really know where the genesis of it was, but these were prosecutorial-led strike force groups, rather than the old task force concept where officers from different agencies work together and it's commanded by one agency that's primarily, providing the funds or the office, whatever, but officers work together. This was prosecutorial-led, so it was run out of the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Okay.
Although we weren't housed there, we didn't work there. They were knee-deep in all of our cases from Jump Street, from the very beginning.
So, if I'm understanding it right, federal government determines there's a problem.
Correct.
They allocate resources for that problem, and in this case, they allocated the resources at some point through the U.S. Attorney's Office, and y'all were part of that process.
Right, but the funds, the resources didn't go through the U.S. Attorney's Office. What happens is they were going to be in charge, essentially.
They're the ones with the hand on the pulse for what the problem is.
Exactly. So as cops, we know how to enforce the law. Like a task force mission is to enforce the law.
Right.
And we've always said, hey, what happens in court stays in court.
Right.
Or is not my job. Not like I'll do my job. My
job is
my shit will be tight when it gets there. Win or lose.
Tell me where we're going.
Exactly.
Okay. Because
this was different.
Information
right. The money's still coming through regular DOJ channels, but the U.S. Attorney's Office is essentially calling the shots on how to work the investigations. Maybe not calling the shots, but has a much more greater input in how to do it.
Basically, it's top down instead of you coming in with a case and saying, hey, this is the case I have, this is a target I have.
Correct.
And then reviewing the case and saying, okay, let's move forward this way. This
is what DC wants us to pursue.
Okay.
And because we were a gun trafficking strike force, obviously our primary concern was gun trafficking.
So talk about gun trafficking. Obviously, I feel like they called it right when they said we had the unrest and the instability at the Mexican border, southwest border, is a big problem. It's still a big problem.
Correct.
It continues to be a problem. They obviously identified that was a problem. Talk a little bit about the gun problem.
Well, in part of that declaration, they declared that a huge part of that instability and that crime wave occurring in the southwest border was due to the trafficking of U.S. source firearms to the Mexican drug cartels that were then using those firearms to perpetrate that violence. Specifically, the claim was from the U.S. civilian firearms market, that people were going into gun shops all along the southwest border and in the interior of the country, purchasing large amounts of firearms, ultimately or subsequently having them trafficked into Mexico and provided to the cartel, and then they were being used in crimes.
Okay. So based on your experience with what you've seen and dealt with as far as trafficking and things like that, obviously they say there's a problem. Instability, that's definitely a problem. Their next step is the fact that they're trafficking guns from the U.S. there, from the civilian market. Could explain the civilian market, what that exactly means. I understand we had the conversation at lunch and it gave me a different view of it. What is U.S. civilian? Well, talk about the civilian market.
Okay. So the civilian firearms market is when you go to your local gun shop or Bass Pro Shop or Cabell, wherever, what you can buy there.
Okay.
All right. You can't buy military grade machine guns. All right. You can't buy things like that. You can't buy, SBR, short barrel rifles, or even silencer, suppressors. There is no silencer, but you can't buy those unless they're, a special class dealer, that can deal in NFA weapons. So you're not talking military grade. You're talking civilian grade firearms that you can purchase from the civilian firearms
US
market.
Civilian that is
Any U.S. civilian that's
prohibited.
not otherwise prohibited can purchase and possess and use. So the whole point of the strike force was to combat this illegal trafficking of these civilian purchased firearms from gun shops in Arizona, specifically, my group was, to, entities in Mexico. We're preventing them from going south.
So what were the numbers that they used to back up the fact of the civilian market is flooding Mexico with guns?
All right. So All right, you're going to open a whole can of worms here. So,
While you're here.
right. All right. So in 2009, when this is declared to be the problem, right? And this is what we need to do to fix it. ATF needs a bunch of money. We'll start these strike forces. We're going to get people on the border, and we're going to stop this flow of firearms south. So also in 2009, ATF initially also began to, with some of the same money, open up offices in Mexico or expand our offices in Mexico. We even launched what we call Spanish E-Trace, which E-Trace is a computer system when a law enforcement agency in the country recovers a firearm or seizes a firearm, they enter it in E-Trace, and we can, ATF record section, can conduct a trace and get you to the first point of retail sale on that firearm.
Okay.
So what that means is you have the manufacturer through the wholesaler to the distributor to the local gun shop and who purchased it from them, who filled out the form, the 4473.
Okay.
Right. The tracing center has access to that data. Sometimes it's a very slow process because it's still primarily just a paper system, although they have tried to automate it. So ATF launches Spanish E-Trace and sends agents, signs them to Mexico to teach Mexican governmental authorities how to submit traces of firearms into these things. Now, what happens is rather than as a firearm is seized, they enter it in the tracing system. Mexico takes their vaults, which is full of firearms that have been seized for sometimes decades, and they dump all of these into the system at one time.
Okay.
All right. Matter of fact, ATF Tracing Center gets a disc from some of our people in Mexico, like I think it was 2 compact discs that has 45,000 different firearms on it from various vaults in and around that section of Mexico that send them discs. They're all automatically dumped into the tracing center. Now, what people have to understand is in order to successfully trace a firearm, the only way that ATF can successfully trace it is it has to have a U.S. nexus in the first place.
Okay.
It means it was manufactured in the U.S. or imported into the U.S. at some point. And it will literally be stamped. Manufactured in the U.S., imported in the U.S.
Okay.
Other than that, we can't trace it. I can't trace a gun that was made in Pakistan or Brazil or Romania or former Soviet bloc and went straight from there to somewhere in South America or to Africa or whatever. There's no way for ATF to trace it. Okay. So we can only trace U.S. source firearms. So shortly after this operation begins, the threat on the U.S. border has already been declared a national security issue. ATF comes out with, I think originally they said 70% of all the crime guns traced in Mexico, 70% of all the crime guns successfully traced in Mexico are U.S. source firearms.
Isn't it?
It's all verbiage. Now, technically, successfully traced, that should be 100% because those are the ones, only the ones we can successfully trace are U.S. source. So what's happening still is the Mexicans that are getting the training on E-Trace, Spanish E-Trace, they're still taking every gun, whether it's stamped, made in the U.S., imported in the U.S. or not, they're still dumping it into E-Trace. So ATF ups their training protocols for the Mexican officials to say, no, unless it's stamped U.S., don't put it in there because it's garbaging the system and it's also bringing that number down, right? That stat number.
Right. Which is what we're looking for. What ATF wants.
You could argue what they're looking for, but I'm telling you, in order to successfully trace it, it's got to have that stamp on it, either manufactured in or imported into.
Okay.
So as this training starts to go through Mexico, those numbers start to rise up of the amount of trace. So they can say 85% of the firearms successfully traced out of Mexico, crime guns successfully traced, come back to U.S. sources. So this is fueling the fire of, okay, the American civilian firearms market is responsible for all this violence. I mean, when you have
cartel violence,
you have a birthday party shot up and 3 of the 5 guns recovered come back to U.S. sources. Well, that's horrible. We have to do something about this. However, what ATF is neglecting to tell the public, and I believe neglecting to tell people on the Hill when they ask for this information, is that their definition of a U.S. firearm is not confined to the civilian firearms market, meaning it didn't come from a dealer. The vast majority of those crime guns recovered in Mexico that can be successfully traced back to either direct purchases from the U.S. government to the Mexican government or direct purchases by the Mexican government from an American manufacturer. So much so that of the successful traces of the gun, 75% of them are direct government-to-government sales or direct purchases by the Mexican government, never entering the U.S. civilian firearms market. And the vast majority of them are not even weapons that you can purchase on the U.S. civilian firearms market. They are military-grade machine guns.
And so, like, what I'm hearing you say is ATF identifies a problem. The U.S. government identifies a problem. ATF rushes to correct that problem because they are the preeminent investigative authority as far as guns are concerned. However, if I hear you correctly, the system that they have, the E-Trace system, only applies to one thing, and so it's just not matching up. Would that be accurate?
Close. I think your sequence is out a little bit.
All right,
so
give me the sequence.
I don't think it's identifying a problem then coming up with a solution. I think it's saying, hey, we're the solution. Okay, so declaring a problem, whether it exists or not.
Right.
Declaring yourself the solution to it.
Okay.
Right? And then when you realize the data doesn't match the problem, we'll get the data that matches the problem. We've already declared ourselves the solution. Now help me prove the problem.
Okay. All right.
All right. And so this is where that big, government machine kicks in. When I'm the only one that controls the data, I can use it to say whatever I want to make it say.
So economy,
right.
Whatever else.
Exactly.
You just manipulate the numbers.
Right. This is the same thing that the government does with, the job statistics and the inflationary rate and everything else. It's all to achieve an end. I mean, I know I can tell you I can't tell you specifically about stuff like that. I have opinions on a lot of things, but
you know for a fact.
I know we do it with tracing data, all right? And having known that and see how it's used and see how it works, you can see how it's exploited in other aspects as well.
Okay.
So ATF, there's violence happening on the Mexican government, and I think people genuinely believed and hate the U.S. civilian firearms market so much, then determined that it had to be the problem. So then they declare a solution. When the data doesn't match it, they launch Spanish E-Trace. We start teaching the Mexican authorities how to use it.
Okay.
Then what we do is we either carefully disguise the definition of U.S. source firearm or just refuse to define it at all to anyone. Not that anyone has asked. To my knowledge, ATF has never been pressed on define a U.S. source firearm. ATF, I think they used to, I don't know if they still do, I've been retired a couple of years now, once a year have a press conference where they release this data, which they should not do. All right. It's clear that you can't release that data for other than criminal justice purposes. It says when anybody that has an E-Trace account can look on it, and it says right on there for that. So they still do it, and they still say the same.
So you think, based on your experience, it is a effort by the ATF on an annual basis to release statistics. Explain that a little bit.
Well, I don't think it's an effort that they do. I mean, for some people, it's an effort. For some people, it's a responsibility. It had become to the point of an annual thing where they just did it, right?
And the information they're releasing is what?
They're releasing the trace data, which people have to understand. E-Trace was never designed to be a data engine, right? It's not a statistical engine. What it is, it's designed to be a lead generation tool, right? So if I'm in my area working as an agent,
okay,
and all of a sudden there are a lot of guns being recovered, and I can check where they're being traced from, and they're all coming out of Chicago or coming out of, Houston, wherever.
Right.
Then I can say, okay, what's the connection here? How are these guns getting from one area to another, and why? That's what it's generated for. It's not a statistical engine. However, ATF uses that data in that way to put out these numbers about the crime guns in Mexico.
Okay.
Now, during this point of where we are with these trade negotiations, so if you have the Mexican government, who have openly said, have been saying for years, we're not going to do anything about the drugs going into the U.S. until you do something about the guns coming down here. Whereas if anyone that was in the weeds on the information could go to the Mexican government and say, you know what, here, I can stop 75% of the crime guns from hitting Mexico overnight, instantly, with a stroke of a pen. No more government-to-government sales, and I'm revoking Mexico's, we have foreign FFLs. We give them a license so that they can purchase directly from manufacturers, and the export licenses are in effect where they can ship them straight to the Mexican government. I'm going to stop all that overnight. Bam, 75% of the crime guns hitting the street in Mexico are done.
But it also does away with the thing that you hear repeated on a constant basis. It almost like a tit for tat. The United States has this insatiable appetite for drugs, and they're saying, well, the Americans are extremely violent. They have all these guns. Stop sending us your guns. And,
Right.
it's kind of like a blame game.
Right. So I'm saying, in order to quell that, you could stop that by saying, okay, I will stop 3/4 of all the crime guns from hitting Mexico by denying your government the ability to purchase them hands right out.
So when you say the 75%, that's based on the Spanish E-Trace.
No. Yeah. Well, that's based on E-Trace data. Any agent out there that has an E-Trace account can run this. All right. When you open up your E-Trace account, it can generate a statistical report, do recovery location Mexico, and you can put in any 12-month time frame between 2009 when we launched Spanish E-Trace until today, or actually until 3 months ago, the last time I had somebody do it. Right. And during any 12-month period, you will see 70% of the crime guns that are recovered during that period are direct government-to-government sales or direct purchases by the Mexican government.
So I want to get a little bit into what you dealt with when you dealt with the Phoenix, and then maybe circle back to like how, as the average American citizen, how do you demand answers for exactly what you just described? I'd like to circle back to that, but let's talk a little bit about Phoenix. You get assigned down there, you're on this strike force, and what did you see? We talked about it a little bit, but like, you've been at that point, what do you have? Eight years of experience between your law enforcement experience, local law enforcement, federal service as a task force officer, and then with ATF. How many years of service do you have when you hit Phoenix, Arizona?
I don't know. I'd been in law enforcement over 15 years.
All right. So you have an extensive, this is the way this is, I don't want to say proper, because I think we talked a little bit about that at lunch. We all understand there might be a bigger picture, and that bigger picture might tell me something different than what I'm actually seeing. Maybe I don't know what the intent. I think we all, anyone in the military, the biggest part of an operation to order is the commander's intent. You may not know what the big picture is. So talk about what you experienced in Phoenix.
So when I first got to Phoenix, and actually backtrack a little bit. So I got orders to go to Phoenix in probably September of 2009.
Okay.
Sometime between then and November, I got a phone call from the gentleman who would be my supervisor.
Okay.
And it was he was in Minnesota, I think, at the time. It was going to be his first assignment as a supervisor. And he's telling me about this case that they have going. It's a really big case, and we're going to do a wire. It's going to be awesome. And I remember sitting in my office in Harrisonburg and telling him, I was like, look, man, having, big cases are big problems. Having done a couple of wires, like, if there's any way we can avoid doing a wire, let's do that. Oh, no, this is going to be great. It's well, we'll see when we get there. Like, let's take a look at it. Right. Okay. So then I get to Phoenix, and I get read in on the case, probably my second day, after processing in and getting a car and stuff like that. And I get read in, and at the time it was 247 or 249 firearms that had been trafficked by this group that they had identified. These weapons were purchased out of 3 or 4 different gun shops in the Phoenix area.
Okay.
And had been recovered already, these 240, at crimes in Mexico. Within a very short period of time. I'm talking what we call it a time to crime. From the time a firearm is purchased until the time it's recovered is a time to crime. Okay. We're talking days. All right.
Okay. So there's a pipeline.
There's a definite pipeline headed down there.
Okay.
So I'm getting read in. We have the suspects identified. The FFLs have been approached. We have the 4473s in hand. We have everybody's vehicle, everybody's address. We know everything that's going on. Even some agents have been there at the time that these firearms were purchased. So I'm thinking, oh, well, great. Well, this case is over. Like we're doing warrants tomorrow.
We're connecting the dots, and we're going to start kicking doors.
Yeah, I mean, we're probably going to kick them sooner rather than later because this is going, fast and furiously. So here we go, game on. So then I'm told, no, absolutely not.
We've identified these people, but we're not ready.
We've identified people. We're going to do a wire. So I'm like, well, why are we going to do a wire? Well, we want to find out this organization. We're going to take a cartel down. And so I'm trying to figure out how we're going to take a cartel down. And I'm asking the questions, and I'm not getting any answers other than this is how we do things here. You're from Virginia. You don't understand these vast international conspiracy investigations. And so then it's very defeating, and I'm the new guy in the building,
Right.
There's I think 4 of us had come in on the same day from offices all over the country assigned to this strike force. And so we're all scratching our heads, but everybody in Phoenix thinks that this is the bee's knees, that this is
the way
is a great case.
Right.
And so we're struggling with it. And then the next day, probably, I think, we're in the office and we get a call to head up to one of the local gun shops that one of our targets is in there buying guns. So we go up there, sit in the parking lot.
And this is one of the ones that had those 240 some guns.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. One of the ones already identified, already had, X number of purchases that he had purchased that had already been recovered. And I see him literally come out of the gun shop with a hand truck and stacks of AK variant rifles on it. The civilian version of AK-47.
So an assault rifle.
Well,
I mean, it depends on who you talk to.
Exactly.
I mean, when we have a violent event, the first thing they say is it's an assault rifle.
Right. So for lack of a better, just call them AK-47.
Yes.
Even though they're just civilian AK variants. But he's got a hand truck full of them. I mean, full. And we watch him load 40 of them into the trunk of his car and on the back seat. And then he gets in the car and starts to drive away, and we're told to follow him.
And you're like,
my first day
here.
All right. We're not doing the warrant yet, but we're going to do this. So this is going to kill the wire. Like, I've seen this now.
You're like, I know.
I wasn't sure if they'd actually watched this before, but now that I've seen this.
I know what's going to happen. I've got muscle memory.
Exactly.
All right.
So I'm throwing my gear on as I'm surveilling this guy, and we're driving down the road. We get south of Tucson a little bit, and we reach him. We watch him meet somebody at an old. It's like a quick mart, stop and rob is what we call it. So
stop and rob.
Yeah. So he meets a guy on the side of the parking lot, and they start pulling stuff out of one, putting it into the other vehicle. So like, great, 2 targets. When are we taking them? Taking them now? No, we're waiting. All right, everybody get ready. Here we go. So they load the 40 some AKs into the other vehicle. I think it was a Jeep Cherokee. Our guy heads back north toward Phoenix. That vehicle heads south. So I'm calling on the radio, who's got who? Let's go. And I'm told, no, stand down, head back to the office. We got what we need. And I'm just dumbfounded.
All right, so at that point, you'd worked a ton of cases.
Yes.
Don't let money walk.
Don't let money walk.
Definitely don't let guns walk.
You never let guns walk. As a matter of fact, if you lost sight of a gun during a case, even if it was a gun that had been altered to never allowed to be fired, right? Nobody went home until it was found.
Right.
Nobody went home.
And this is 15 years worth of experience, and you're sitting there going, what just happened?
Well, I don't understand what happened. So I'm, like I say, the whole ride back to the office, I'm trying to reconcile what just happened in my head.
You're like, maybe I didn't see this right.
Right. Or I'm thinking there's something that I don't know. Like I'm missing something. There's a bit of this information that wasn't provided to me at the reading. So I go in and go straight to the boss's office and say, hey, look, I did Army Intel. I understand if there's stuff going on. I just need to know, because what I just witnessed, I've never seen before in my entire career, especially with ATF. And I need to know what's going on. Oh, this is a big case. We're going to take down a cartel.
By giving them guns.
Right. And so we later describe that, by keep saying that, taking down a cartel, we later described that as there was an old episode of South Park where they talk about the underwear gnomes.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody's underwear is missing.
Right.
And they have this PowerPoint. It's like step 1, steal underwear, Step 2 is a big question mark, and then it says equals big profit.
Right.
So they got the first part and the last part figured out, but not the middle part. So that's what this felt like. All right, we're going to, to combat illegal firearms trafficking to Mexico, we're going to allow firearms to be illegally trafficked to Mexico.
And not with the normal source that you're experiencing.
Right.
Trace has shown you.
Right.
How they normally get them.
Right.
You're flooding it with a different
We're
market.
flooding them from the civilian firearms market.
Okay.
And we're going to take down a cartel. Like, you can't get there from here. Right. It doesn't make sense. So that's when the beatings start, for lack of a better way to putting it.
I mean, you've always struck me as somebody that just rolls with the punches. Did that not happen in Phoenix?
No, it took some pretty heavy-handed convincing. And still then, ultimately, I complained and bitched so much that they threw me out of the building, turned off all my passes, denied me access to my computer systems, assigned me to the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force on the other side of town, and told me not to come back.
So you got the red tag, doesn't play well with others, may bite.
Exactly.
Let's send them to the FBI and maybe they can fix them.
I even told them at one point in the office, I asked the case agent, she asked me, she said, and there was a part of her where I think, because she had been a cop before as well, and I think there was a part of her that understood her, that she had some internal turmoil over it. But when you have everyone in your agency, I mean, all the way up to the director, playing slap and tickle, giving you attaboys about how good it is, and then you got DOJ all the way up to the assistant attorney general, deputy attorney general, telling you how great this case is and what a good job you're doing, everything like that, that she was struggling with it. And so she asked me what I thought about the case. And I said, don't ask me questions you don't know the answer to. And
so what did you tell her about the case? Like, what is your unedited version of the case?
Well, I told him it was no different. Why don't we just, you remember churning cases? Mm-hmm. I was like, why don't we just do this as a churning case? Like, we'll sell the guns directly because it's no different from what we're doing right now. Like, not only are we watching this happen, first of all, you have to understand, not only are we watching this to happen, okay?
We're facilitating.
The reason we identified these people and we knew about it was because the FFLs called us and said, hey, I got a guy bringing a Crown Royal bag full of cash in here, wants to buy 20 AK-47s. Like, what do you want me to do? Nah, we got this. Go ahead and sell it to him. So the FFLs are trying to report it.
The ones everybody wants to say.
The ones that everybody wants to shut down and blame for everything are the ones that gave us the information in the first place.
So they're not like these sneaky back.
No, the vast majority of FFLs are just small American business owners, right?
Right.
That have been more than helpful in
and here's an example of them trying to do the right
thing and being lied to by us. Telling them that we've got this. Like, don't worry about it. We're on this.
Right.
But I don't want to do the sale. It's okay. We've got you.
But so
and telling them, essentially reassuring them that we're not going to let these guns be used. Like they think, but ATF saying we've got this, that it's okay.
So this is not. So they're even more than you as an agent in the field are thinking. We know how ATF regulates what we do. Everything that we do is regulated, checked, rechecked. There's no wiggle room for us as an FFL. Right. There's no way this regulatory agency is going to do what we reported is going to happen and not take care of.
Right.
It's
something that if they had done on their own, not only do they face criminal prosecution, but immediate revocation of their license.
I mean, I hate to bring in like this story, but like I was listening to the other day, ATF indicted the Larry Vickers, the TAC guy,
right?
And obviously he's done some things, but I just think it's ironic in some way. Like you have this regulatory agency that is just blowing up regulations left and right to prove a point. I mean, and so what is the point in your, like, based on your experience with it?
Well, I got to tell you, having not done the regulatory side of the house, I can't speak for them.
Okay.
I have heard from FFLs before the unfairness that they feel from our regulatory side.
Okay.
I know some regulatory inspectors. Some of them are really good people. I know some that I would not disagree if you said we're agenda driven in a certain way.
Okay.
So I understand the FFL's frustration with them. And I understand, like I said, the good ones, when they go in there, the FFL thinks that they don't know that that's one of the good ones. You know what I mean?
They just see. They
just know the last ATF regulatory person that came in here tried to shut me down.
Yeah, busted their balls.
Right.
Okay.
So, and I'm not saying it doesn't need to happen. Like, not all FFLs are perfect. Some make honest mistakes. Some make a lot of them. Some are careless. And there are some dirty ones. But my experience has been very few. Very few. The vast majority are just, hardworking small business owners.
So let's go to, like, what was the final straw for you to take all that you had invested into an agency and look at it and go, I've got to do something? What was the event that caused you to be like, I can't deal with this anymore? I mean, I feel like it is very clear. I read your book and it was very clear. You were telling everybody that would listen, this is a problem. This is a problem. What did you describe that was going to be a problem that happened just like it?
So I had told them in the middle of a heated argument in the office one day with the boss, and I think the ASAC was there and the case agent and everyone else in the group, that, were they ready to watch that widow of a Border Patrol agent or a Cochise County deputy accept that folded flag? Because it was going to happen. It wasn't a matter of if, it was only a matter of when.
The folded flag is like
because they were killed in the line of duty.
Right, off their casket because they were killed in the line of duty.
Yeah. And And after that, I was. That's right before I was thrown out. And so once I was sent to the FBI, and I'm not proud of this point, but being away from it and not having to see it and not having it thrown in my face and not getting beat up every day, the mentality was, they're going to sink their ship. Let them do it. I'm out. I got nothing to do with it anymore.
You told them at that point. I mean, I think it's easy for you as a person to sit there and go, like, I could have done more. But I think at some point you look at it and go, I'm going to do what I feel like is best. I'm on this joint terrorism task force. I'm sure y'all are doing great things. I mean, would that be accurate?
Yeah.
And so, like, I mean, you can beat your head against the wall a certain amount of time. And I think we talked about that, and we'll circle back to that.
Yeah, but so it's just, it's that, complacency. It's not bothering me anymore. So why am I worried about it? And that's the part that I struggle with. And that was me. Like, that was me saying that. And it's okay, it's on them now. I'm out. I've done everything. I've said everything. I've said my piece. Nobody listens. All I got was beat up for it. So I'm out. And I'm glad I'm out. Drive your train off the tracks. I don't care. I'm done. And then December came. And my wife and I were having coffee in the morning like we always do. And there was a news report about a Border Patrol agent that was killed in Pet Canyon, which is down near Rio Rico, south of Tucson. And we both instantly looked at each other and we thought, it
happened.
This one. And just a few minutes later, my phone rang. And it was a friend of mine that was back at division office, ATF division office. And he told me if I heard about the Border Patrol agent. His name was Brian Terry. And I said, yeah, I just seen it on the news. And he said, well, at least one of the guns recovered comes back to Fast and Furious.
Your strike force case.
Right. And my heart sank, man. It just sank. And it was like, it wasn't even a surprise because I knew it was going to happen.
Mm.
It was just one of those things you really hope doesn't.
As much as you wanted to be wrong. Not
right, yeah. Please, prove me wrong on that one any day. And so I was sick and I didn't know what to do. And I went to my office.
At the task force.
At the JTTF, right. And my office was in a skiff, so there was no television. And, I mean, there are parts of the skiff that I tell them, but we didn't have anyone in ours. And I was just sitting there just pounding my head or with my head in my hands and wondering what to do. And then I got a phone call from another friend and at the division office. And they had said that, and this might have even been the next day, that rumor was there were some congressional oversight people that were looking into it. Like things had started to get out.
The ball had started rolling to correct the problem.
And I told them, I said, well, if you have anything to do with, like, if you're talking to anybody or you know anyone that is, you make sure to tell them to talk to me. If somebody in DC calls down here and talks to the SAC, they're going to get lied to. All right. Or even the group supervisor or the ASAC. You tell them if somebody really wants to know what happened, call me and I'll tell them. And a few days go by and I get a phone call on my work phone. And it's a gentleman that identifies himself as a congressional investigator with Senator Grassley's office. And it was three of them on the phone. They were all having me on speakerphone. And they said that they had questions about the Operation Fast and Furious to ask me. So I asked them to hang on for a second. I was able to verify that they were who they said they were. And I said, okay, I will answer any question that you have except for one. And that's why. Because the story I'm about to tell you makes no sense. And you're going to ask me why, and I don't know the answer to it. I can tell you what they told me, but I cannot answer why.
I can't even wrap my head around it. I was in it.
And I said, the second thing I want to tell you is the minute I'm done talking to you, I'm going to tell ATF that I talked to you because I'm not going to stab them in the back. And they said, we encourage you not to do that. We don't want you retaliated against. Well, your release, your disclosures to Congress are confidential. We will never tell them. And I said, I'm not going to do that. Like I said, if that's going to hurt your investigation, talk to me last. Do everything else you need to first, and then talk to me because I'm going to tell ATF. And they said, no, it's not going to hurt us. It might hurt you, but okay. And so I told them.
And so not only did you, so at that point, did you have whistleblower status, or how exactly does that work? I don't want to say we were laughing at lunch, but we were talking about like one of the things that was a benefit for you is your annual training that you had about the whistleblower
Right, yeah.
paid off for you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. They used to make us do the online training, and one 2-hour block of it every year is whistleblower training.
And you're like,
I'll
never need this. But
no, I went back and took it like during this to try to refresh memory on what everything.
So you're like,
right, what can be disclosed and what can, and who you can talk to. And I think that frustrated them as much as anything else. The fact that
you stayed on the line.
Right.
Okay.
And so yeah, from the minute I disclosed to Congress, the whistleblower protections were involved.
Went in effect.
Enacted. The problem is there's not much protection. People think that it is. It's not. The burden is on the whistleblower to prove that not only you were retaliated against, but it was done specifically because of your act of blowing the whistle.
So that it's a narrow road.
It's a very narrow road. When all your agency has to do is, pull up some, your next evaluation, they tell your supervisor to give you a bad one. Oh, here you go. And you can't for that, or you get dealt with for that.
Right.
Or any accusation.
So it's not like a complete whitewash or like, hey,
no, everybody thinks
John's a good employee, so we're not going to retaliate. We're just he seems like his head's in the right place, so we're just going to.
And people that think, oh, whistleblower protections, oh, you're untouchable. Oh, no.
Far from it.
Right, far from it.
So talk a little bit about what you've recounted today. You pretty much said that, and with all the smoking guns, for lack of a better way of saying it, presented all that to congressional investigators. And what happens? I mean, you had to go in front of Congress.
Right.
Just go through that process.
It's so hard. I don't even know where to start. Like, I mean, you're talking about the minutia of what happened during the process, or ultimately the end at the end of it.
Just like skim over like the basic process. You report this. You report it to these congressional investigators. Go back and tell your RAC, I guess, at that point. Or?
I called my ASAC because
at
the time, once they threw me out of the strike force, I was told that only communication I could have with ATF would be through him, through my ASAC at the time.
Okay, all right. So they pushed you completely out of the chain of command, and you were reporting directly to
an ASAC. And ASAC who had made it clear to everyone that communications with Agent Dodson was detrimental to anyone's ATF career.
You weren't singled out, were you?
No, not a bit.
Not at all. All right, so you go through the whistle. So at what point do you end up in front of Congress? And I mean, what triggered that?
Well, first of all, I want to say apparently there were other people talking to congressional investigators, and I still to this day don't know initially how they caught wind of it in the first place. So I by no means want to say that I was the only one.
But you're here telling your story.
Right. I'm just here telling my story. So how I ended up in front of Congress was because, so Senator Grassley's office had sent, and you got to figure at the time, the Republicans were in charge of the Senate, but the Democrats had the House.
Okay.
So subpoena authority, no, that was wrong. Democrats had the Senate, Republicans had the House. Subpoena authority only belongs in the party that's in power, that controls the House. So like Senator Grassley at the time was the minority head of the commission that he was on. Okay. So they were trying to get Chairman Issa, who was in the House side, a congressman, because he would have subpoena power as the head of the HOGAR, the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee.
Okay.
So until that happened, like there's, I guess, all kinds of stuff happening on that up on the hill.
So the information at that point, what you had told him had gotten out. The information was available.
Well, it was about to get out. And see, what happened was I was told that it's dead in the water. I give him the information and the reports, like the documents
to the congressional investigators.
To the congressional investigators.
Okay.
They had sent a letter to the Attorney General of the United States at the time, Eric Holder.
Okay.
And Eric Holder had replied categorically, DOJ categorically denies the allegations.
So you have the Attorney General for the United States going on there and saying you didn't tell the truth.
Right. I read the letter as John Dodson is a liar.
Okay.
And needless to say, that pisses me off.
Yeah. Got a little frustrated.
Right. So right around the same time, I get a call from a reporter.
Okay.
Calls me on my wife's cell phone, as a matter of fact. And I answer the phone. My wife says, yeah, he's right here, and hands me the phone. And I said, who is this? Cheryl Atkinson with CBS News. She asked me, who am I talking to? And I said, well, you called me. And she said, well, I know you're one of two people. You're either John Dodson or somebody
Another
else.
person. Okay.
And I said, I'm John Dodson. And she said, I'm doing a story. I've talked to Brian Terry's family, the Border Patrol agent, and I'm trying to get them the information because they've heard about the congressional investigation, and DOJ has told them that it's absolutely not true. The attorney, the U.S. attorney for the District of Arizona, had flown up to Michigan, sat down with them and told them specifically it wasn't true.
Told them that.
Right. And she said, I'm trying to do a story. I'm trying to do them right. And I want to know if I could interview you. And I was like, no, I have nothing to say to you. And she said, well, disguise your voice and we'll hide your face. And I said, no, ma'am. I said, but I promise you, if I ever do have anything that I want to say to the American people, I'm going to say it. Like, I'm not doing that. And she said, well, I'm doing the story. It airs on, I think, a Thursday. And, which is like the next night or something.
Okay.
And she said, will you watch it? And just, I want you to see it. And you can see I'm trying to do the right thing.
For his family. Okay.
And so I watched it, and I could tell by the people that she was talking to and the information that she had.
It's incomplete.
It's 100% incomplete. But they were people that knew people that had information. Like, none of them were direct information.
Right, but they had the right.
And there were a couple of voices. There was nobody's picture. There was little silhouette things. It wasn't even silhouettes of them. It was like clipboard silhouette things of people up there. And the voices were distorted. And I knew the information was at best second party, probably third party.
Definitely not somebody sitting where you were sitting.
Right. But I could tell she was trying to do the right thing. And I remember watching it and thinking about Brian's family watching it. And this was their hope. Like, this was their hope to try to find out some answers about their brother, their son, And I was like, this is the best that they have. You have an entire building full of federal agents, and nobody will step up and say the right thing. Nobody will just fucking say it. So I called Grassley's staff, and I said, you set me up an interview with Cheryl Atkinson. And they said, we recommend against that because we can't. Disclosing to Congress is covered under whistleblower protection. The once you hit the press, we can't do anything to help you. And I was like, well, you can't do anything anyway. You said it's dead in the water because the attorney general has stated that I'm full of shit. So I said, either you set it up or I will. So I met her at a hotel near Phoenix Airport 2 days later. And I sat down and did an interview with her.
So you gave her everything.
Yeah. I mean,
everything that you could give her.
Yeah.
And so for you, I think we talked a little bit about this. It's just, I think we go into this occupation and we think we're here to do a higher good. And then there's a defining moment. What did you call it at lunch?
A red pill moment?
A red pill moment that you realize, like, everything I think I've seen up until this point is this.
Right.
Maybe it's not. And I don't know. I mean, I'm always amazed at just people, like a single person like you. I know who you are. I know what you stand for. But like, it takes a huge person to stand up to the entire federal government and to have somebody that is two or three from the very top of the most powerful country in the United States calling you a liar. Had to be a lonely feeling, didn't it?
Oh, it was lonely, but it's not. I'm two things. I'm nobody's hero and I'm nobody's victim. All right.
No, I'm not saying you're a victim. I'm just saying, like, I think that's a heavy burden to bear.
Oh, it's a burden. I mean, the Attorney General himself went out of his way to get a direct message to me that he did not want me in the Department of Justice.
Right. And so talk briefly. I think there are a lot of people out there that could be in a very similar situation than you, that are either involved in the government or something else, that they're like, man, I don't want to be the only one standing. Am I really going to make a difference? Right. Talk about, like, after you do the whistleblowing and everything else, you said something at lunch about how it changed your daily routine. Talk about that a little bit as far as being expendable at this point.
Oh yeah. It's like I said, when you're looking around, once the Attorney General of the U.S. calls you a liar, and then you realize, and there's a lot of other things that led up to this too. There was an article in the Washington Post that was throwing and this is before I blew the whistle. When Agent Terry got killed, ATF still used that to say U.S. source firearms were the problem.
Right.
And they were throwing these gun dealers under the bus openly, leaking E-Trace data to the Washington Post to paint the gun dealers that had been working with us under this investigation as the bad guys.
Right.
So, and then the Attorney General categorically denies everything. I look around and like these are deep, dark, murky waters, and I'm the most expendable dude there with 0 life raft, If somebody's going to go, it's going to be me. And I was told quite clearly by congressional staffers that the first play in the playbook for them is shoot the messenger. Like you kill the messenger, kill the message. So they were going to come after me with everything they had. You go down this road, and they did that. They put a tracker on my car. They had a surveillance team on me. They were tapping my phones. They were in my wife's, on her phone, in her computer. Everything I did was they were just looking for a reason. And every ATF agent knows how to build a bomb. So I would wait for my wife to go to work and my kids to go to school before I'd start my car in the mornings. I had to give her a list of names and numbers about where to start if I don't come home today. I had to have my own range day to qualify because
you didn't want to be out.
I didn't want to be killed in a training accident. And actually that didn't come from me. That came from DC arguing that. And, people around my house, that movie, what is that Russell Crowe movie, The Informant or whatever? Mm-hmm. Everybody said, somebody told us to watch that, to get an idea of like what might be in store for us. That motherfucker had it easy.
No, he was
after watching that.
Yeah.
Like we watched that going, that was a weekend for us.
Yeah.
It was just amazing. But anyway, if you're in that point, like I say, and the reason that I wrote the book, one of the reasons was my wife and I had always said, if what we've been through can ever help anyone else, then we have to do it. You have to put it out there. And I would just tell people, yeah, you're going to feel alone. Like I stood up when I told ATF that I just spoke to congressional investigators and I went on the news and put my face out there. I thought it was my Spartacus moment, where everybody else was going to stand up and say, yep, he's right. He's right.
Hell
Instead, the guys that I had been through doors with, that I've been working with, right, that I thought had my back and I knew I had theirs, all I got was crickets. The only people that I could talk to were 3 guys on a phone from DC that I've never seen, had no idea what they looked like, but they were there for me. The only other people I could trust were the people that as cops we said we could never trust, and that was 2 reporters, Cheryl Atkinson and William Longinus with Fox News. Cheryl was CBS at the time. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of shithead reporters out there that DOJ hired to do hit pieces on me. I'm not saying all reporters, but during that time.
She stood up.
Yeah.
It's like you stood up. So, seriously, like I could keep you in that seat all day. But like from my standpoint, like what would you, like after the experience that you had, what would you tell people in the environment? We talked a little bit about COVID today and everything else. What would you tell the average citizen that doesn't have the depth of knowledge that you have of government? What would you tell them when they see something that's problematic? Don't believe what you read? What
yeah, it's, you can't. The government, okay, I say the government is a giant self-licking ice cream cone, the federal government, all right?
I like that.
Yeah, it's there.
T-shirt.
It exists solely to enjoy itself, yet we all have to pay for it. Like that's what it's there for. Do not think that someone is coming to save you, right? Because they're not. It's going to save itself. It is that big. You're not even a cog in the wheel to it, all right? And people don't care until something happens that affects them. And I was one of those, right? I had heard, you hear about all these conspiracy theories and government and things like that, and I never thought about it. I knew we couldn't organize a bake sale, much less pull together something like that.
Right.
Then I find out, then you find yourself in it and you realize,
it is
shit, if we're capable of this, what are we capable? It's one thing to know what your government can do, right? It's another thing when you learn what they're willing to do, and it's terrifying.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I know we mentioned at lunch today, as far as, Brian Terry's family, I do think that you've done them right. I know you feel a certain way about what happened when you went to the task force, the terrorism task force. But like I said, man, like you were the one that stood up, like you're the one that took that step, and without your step, it wouldn't have gotten to where it's gotten to. So don't beat yourself up, man. Like you did the right thing. You did a great job. I think you had like a big person in the corner over there helping you.
Oh yeah.
And,
Yeah, I wouldn't be here today without her, trust me.
Yeah, I think we're all better because of the people that we're affiliated with, and in this case, married to. So, thanks, brother.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate you.